is some art tips on making your own fantasy races for fantasy and science fiction stories. So here I'm starting with a little bit of a study on Parasaur, which is an extinct dinosaur from the Cretaceous period. It was a herbivorous member of the Hadrosaur family, and I'm about to make up a race that's based very loosely on Parasaur, but on hadrosaurs in general. So it's a good idea to do some studies and referencing of the creatures that your race is most closely resembling or based on. I used some anatomy from Iguanodon and other similar relations as well, but because I've studied paleobiology, I can use all that different information to help me with my creation process. I'm just adding scales and various details here, and I'm working in different layers in Procreate, so I can do some things on top and some things underneath. Use layers to your own advantage. Don't let them work against you. I'm also using modify tools and eraser tools to help sculpt things out. In a minute I'm going to change the angle of the eyes because I believe they're on the wrong angle. It's more sideways and facing backwards on the head and less stereoscopic. On my race, or humanoid, I'm going to make things more stereoscopic because you sort of start with a human base and then modify it with the features you're going to add in. Now, Parasaur had a remarkable trombone-like crest that allowed for really intense vocalizations and was also probably used for display. I did two different reconstructions here because I'm not quite certain what it looked like, but there is a lot of information on fairly close relatives, especially Brachylophosaurus, where they found a dinosaur mummy. And I'm just using what information I have, doing a couple studies, and then getting right into my racial creation process. Just adding a bit more detail to the background. I advise you also look up information about Parasaur. It's one of my favorite dinosaurs. It's really cool. Now the Calazani are a race I made up several years ago. I think it was 2010 originally, but it could have been a little bit earlier. And they have sexual dimorphism, so the males and females look different. Humans have that as well. The males are also slightly larger. I'm doing different details here to show the differences. There's also a difference in age that's very clear in the males, because as the older the males get, the more spines and longer the crest grows. The female's crest is shorter and curves upwards, whereas the male's curves slightly downwards and is longer. Male ears are larger and pointier and also much more dipped in on the side, whereas female ears are smaller and shorter. The general body makeup is a little bit more like humans in the sense that the male body looks more human masculine and the female body looks more female human feminine, but there are no mammary glands, so there's no breasts because they're a dinosaurian race, not a mammalian race. They stand on tippy toes, and it's very clear the difference between genders. Females also have a slightly shorter tail that's usually a bit thinner, and they don't have a very long tail overall. More like Iguanodon, their pinky finger is a thumb, but their thumb finger is also a thumb in this case, so they actually have two thumbs and three fingers in the middle. I thought this would be interesting. Male eyes are more angular and a little smaller proportionately, but not that much smaller, and female eyes are larger a little bit and more rounded. They are a herbivorous race, and I'm working out layers here so that the clothing is done on a different layer on top. So I actually have sort of a naked version and a clothed version that I did the line art for, so that I could later go in and do different costume designs, and so I could see what they look like without clothing. They really don't have any shame of nudity in most of their cultures, so they mostly wear clothing for fashion. They also have the ability to flush bright colors in the face for mood, and the males flush more exaggerated, so brighter orange and brighter reds. The females are a little more subtle, and they use scent in communication as well as color signaling a little bit more than many other races. This is a race that's present on multiple worlds I created, but right now I only have it on 2 worlds I created in particular, including a new one I made up called Reale, which I'm about to use for a new Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I have all the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rules written out for this race as well. Calazani are meant to be more naturally evolved from a Parasaur-like Hadrosaurian, and they also have certain abilities that are beyond the average. So they have psionic abilities or mind powers, In general, they have the ability to shield their mind a bit and are very difficult to put to sleep magically when they do so. They also are difficult to mind control or charm. They can also give themselves dark vision, but a special psionic dark vision that allows them to still see in color. They can turn these powers off and on, and they can layer them. As they go up in levels or get more powerful or older in general, they gain the ability to attack with a psionic ability called Psi Strike, and at a little bit of a higher level, they also get the ability to heal themselves slightly with psionic abilities. They also have an extremely good digestive system that allows them to take extra nutrients out of the food they digest and even go a little bit longer without eating. They also can digest pretty tough plant matter when they absolutely have to, though they prefer higher quality foods. As I said, they're purely herbivorous, so they would prefer things like fruits, nuts, vegetables, but they prefer higher quality food. However, as I said, they have a very good digestive system, so they can actually eat poorer quality food than that. Another thing to remember about them is that they have various camouflage skin colors, usually with shades of green, cream, and brown, and there's a lot of different racial variation amongst these colors. Their eye colors tend to be golden, turquoise, blue, or brown. This is a new race I invented for the world of Reale due to some random rules telling me to make up a new race. So it is a Genet person fae called a Gentlebody. Now Gentlebody are able to glide with their wings, but not until they reach 3rd level. Then, at 6th level, once per long rest, they can cast Fly on themselves, but only for 10 minutes. So they have limited flight. The wings are mostly for show, but a strong individual can still use them a bit magically. They can see in the dark, and they have the ability to balance really well with their super long tails. They're also very charismatic and persuasive, and they dislike being in confined spaces, but adventurers always break these rules anyway, so don't feel bad about that. Now, instead of sleeping like normal, they're more like elves because they trance for 4 hours, and they have the ability to predict the future sometimes, but this varies by individual. They also have a cantrip they begin with as a bonus at 1st level, which is chosen from a special list. I have all the rules written out for this race. There is also a regular Genet person race that isn't part Fae, called Navarre, which you'll see a male example of at the end of this video. Now, Gentlebody in general are very fun-loving and a little bit more chaotic. They also have a high likelihood to be able to make magic in addition to their standard racial magic, so a lot of them have spellcasting abilities, and they also age equivalent to half-elves. They're sort of a half-fae. They're a half Genet person, a half fae race. Now, they vary from the regular Genet people because, first of all, they have wings, and their wings can either have 2 wings, or 1 pair, 4 wings, or 2 pairs, or 6 wings, which is 3 pairs, and this varies from individual to individual. The colors of the wings also vary quite a bit, so don't expect any 2 sets of wings to be the same. They're usually colorful, and they can either be semi-transparent or opaque. When opaque, the wings can either have a different coloration on top or bottom, or have the exact same coloration on top and on bottom. The differences between the regular Genet people and the Gentlebody are a couple more things. The Gentlebody don't have claws on their toes. They have whites in their eyes, whereas the Navarre's eyes go all the way to the edges. They more often have pink noses, and they don't have whiskers, whereas the Navarre, the regular Genet people, do have whiskers. The Gentlebody more often have even longer tails, but a Navarre can have a very long tail too. Now, here I'm drawing an individual character, an NPC from the upcoming campaign, without giving away too many details, just in case my players watch. I'm going to say that she's a fun, spunky character that suits her race very well. Now, as you can see, I got an inspiring reference that I thought suited the personality and clothing styles of the character, and I used it to help. Now, this reference was got from Pexels, and it's a public domain image. But as you can see, I used it to help me to do a better job, but I definitely didn't just copy the reference. In fact, I changed it more than enough that I didn't have to show or claim the reference because it's just a humanoid pose at a certain point. I'd already designed the character of Darla Pinkleton. She's a journalist from this large city that the campaign begins in, and I don't want to give away too much about her personality, but I think she's a really fun, if slightly annoying character. Darla was partially created from random rolls from a bunch of charts I have for creating NPCs. I've written out a lot of random charts lately, using D percentiles, D20s, D12s, and other dice in order to come up with random things to help you create various things for your campaigns. Now for her, I wanted to make sure she had that spunky punk-like style, and I also wanted to make sure I got her hair right, and it took me a second, but I had to make sure the wings were correctly in perspective in three-dimensional space. I used the layers to make sure the netting in her shirt was shaded on top, and I made sure to get a lot of the shading on that same layer above the other layers so that it could shine above them, and then as a semi-transparent layer you could see the colors underneath. I also adjusted some of the colors a couple times because I wasn't happy with my first pass. I was using the reference for a couple things, not just the pose, but also for some of the way the shading was working. But as you can see, I had to figure out things and change things. I had to figure out the whole hidden arm in the picture, for example, that was completely blocked by the jacket. I made sure none of my picture was blurry, even though there was blur in the original picture I was using, and I didn't copy everything exactly. Well, she's a Gentlebody, so she's not a human at all, and most of the things about her are very different. However, there was a lot of stuff with the original reference photo that I thought really represented her well, so it was a very good place to start. This is a really good way of using reference, as an inspiration and starting point, but not a finishing point. The other thing about using reference is, if you come up with the idea and rough sketches first, and then find reference that suits it, your final artwork will be less based on the reference, and more based on your original idea. I decided I wanted to do a color line art for this, so I alpha locked the line art layer on top, duplicated it, made the original black lines invisible, and then using the alpha lock I could go over the lines quickly without painting anywhere I didn't already draw. I also worked out the colors of the wings with some random rolls before doing this, but I can still adjust things if I didn't end up liking it. Darla is a very interesting character to me, and I hope my players find her interesting and probably a little bit annoying, but in a fun way. So here's the Gentlebody, also pronounced Gentlebody. This one can be pronounced two different ways. And I showed it in a previous YouTube video as a racial profile where I showed myself doing Gennet studies. In this case, I'm just showing it as an example so it can compare and contrast with the fairy version, so you can see the difference between the regular Gennet person and the fairy version. Now, here are some additional tips for coming up with your own race. Do studies, once more, on the most similar animals or creatures to the race you're coming up with. Really think about how this would integrate with the human anatomy. When you're doing a humanoid race, you always start with the human anatomy first and then add on the creature. If your creature is mammalian, you're almost certainly going to make it even more human-like in that it will have abdominal muscles very similar to a human, hip muscles very similar to a human, and it will have breasts. Masculine chest for males and feminine breasts for females. If you're not doing a mammal, you have to really think about how much of that human anatomy is going to remain. If it's non-mammalian, I advise seriously considering removing the breasts and some of the human-like structure in the chest. You also have to decide if something steps on their tippy toes. If you're going to do plantiform feet like a human, standing directly on the bottom of the feet, or if you're going to do digitigrade feet, or standing on the tippy toes, like a lot of animals do. So look at the anatomy of the actual animal you're basing it on and decide how much you're putting in. The other thing Gentlebody have that's different from Gentlebody is they have paw pads. So they have paw pads on the bottom of their feet and on the bottom of their hands, whereas Gentlebody have more human-like hands. Gentlebody still have retractable claws, but they don't have the separated, distinct paw pads. And the other differences were already listed. So, Gentlebody are a fun race that are really good at digesting different foods, and they also have a stench spray, but it's considered impolite in most standard societies to use this in civilized places. And they also have the ability to digest food really well, like the calazeni. Another thing about them is that they have a very adaptable diet, they have a balancing tail, they can use their claws to attack, and they also tend to be more neutral, as an interesting aside. I have all the 5th edition D&D rules written out for this race as well. And I hope you enjoyed this video. One of the details I did here is to add a purplish bluishness into some of the shadows here, so that it looks more like there's additional reflected light. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video with a few different fantasy races I made up, as well as some interesting tips and information about making up your own fantasy races. Remember, having something to start with is often very helpful, and studying real-world history, cultures, and animals that have existed now or existed in the past. You can also mix 2 or more species together. I'll be doing additional videos about races that I made up myself. I hope you look forward to future videos. Goodbye!